Hi, in this lesson I just want to talk a little bit about setting yourself up for watercolor paint. So first I want to talk a little bit about the paint themselves. You can either get the paint um, in tube form, like I've got here, where you just squeeze the paint out that you're going to be using, or you can get the paint in cake form, in pans. The sets that I've acquired for the students, you guys will be getting pans. Those will be available this week. Now, the only difference between the two is one, the ones that come from the tube have a little water mixed in with them already. The ones that you're getting in the pans are what are called semi-moist watercolors. They're more like cakes. It doesn't necessarily mean that one is better than the other. The quality of a paint is determined by the amount of pigment that's in the paint and the binder. The poorer quality paints have more filler in them. Whether you're using cake watercolors or tube watercolors, they work primarily the same. Even if these dry out, they can just simply be reactivated by adding water. So as these start to dry out, they become more and more like the cake watercolors that you would find in a pan. Now I like to use a dish or a plate as my palette, white. So if you have one of these, that would be great. Please don't use your mother's china or a nice set of dishes. Just see if you can find a random dish in the cupboard somewhere. And if not, you can usually pick one up at a thrift shop for about $1 or so. So if I'm using the tubes, I'll squeeze them out along the rim of the plate, and then I can do all my mixing in the center. And eventually you are going to want to clean that out, but it's nice even when they dry, if you're coming back to a painting, to have all the colors there, and all you have to do is add a little bit of water and it reactivates them. For cleaning your brush, you want to make sure you have a jar of clean water, and you can just grab one, like a spaghetti sauce jar or some pickle jar or something like that. When you're finished with them, just wash them out really good and you can use those. I like to have 2 jars. One of them is for me to clean the brush in, and the other one is just to give it a quick rinse, and also so I'll have nice clean water that I can use to activate my paints. That way I won't contaminate them. So you clean your brush. You don't want to jam it down into the bottom of the jar and really, swish it down there hard. That will end up damaging the bristles. So just dip it into the water, do a nice figure 8. The nice thing about watercolor is even if the paint dries on the bristles of the brush, you can still clean it. All you have to do is reactivate the paint by putting it into the water and swish it around. That wouldn't happen with acrylic brushes and acrylic paint. It would ruin the brush if the paint dried on there. Watercolors, it's not going to ruin the brush at all. One thing that will ruin a watercolor brush is if you leave it sitting in the water like this with the brush down. Eventually, it'll bend the bristles and they'll hold that shape and you can't get rid of it. So please, after you clean your brush, just set it off to the side like that. I like to have a sheet of paper towel or a sponge or something like that. Not because you want to dry your brush off before you use it. It just helps in terms of cleaning your brush. Also, it's nice if you need to take a piece of paper towel or something and soak up some of the color off your painting. The last thing about the setup is the paper that you're going to be using. You want to make sure that you're using watercolor paper, something that actually specifies that it is watercolor paper. There will be some texture to it, and the heavier the weight of the paper, the less likely it will be to warp when you're painting on it. Now, the paper that we're going to be using is a mixed media paper, but it does specify that it is usable for watercolors. paper that's used for painting on has what is called sizing. They add something to the paper to keep it from falling apart when mixed with water. So even a heavy stock like cardstock or something like that is not good for watercolor. Construction paper, not good for watercolor. As the paper mixes with the water, it starts to break apart, and you'll end up getting something like pills all over the paper. The last thing is using a pencil to sketch out your design ahead of time. So a lot of people like to plan their artwork out, and they'll sketch it out in pencil. The problem with that is pencil tends to show through. So here's a quick sketch I did and painted on it. Once the paint dries, it locks the pencil into the painting, so it cannot be erased. You can press really hard and maybe pick up some of the pencil, but it'll damage the paper in the process, and then the paint won't look good on top of it. So this is a painting class. It's not a drawing class. I don't want you to draw it all out and put in all the details in pencil and then just color it in. You need to learn how to create the details with the paint. So if you want to plan it out ahead of time in pencil, that's okay as long as you draw it very lightly. Stay away from drawing too many details, and then right before you begin the painting, erase the pencil lines so that they're barely visible, and that will help keep them from showing through at the end of the painting.